Let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION this hour, where Donald Trump has said that he will not order the Americans to wear masks, even as the United States continues to be the world's worst affected nation in this pandemic. Listen in.
People to have a certain freedom, and I don't believe in that, no. And I don't agree with the statement that if everybody wear a mask, everything disappears. Hey, Dr. Fauci said don't wear a mask. Our Surgeon General, terrific guy, said don't wear a mask. Everybody was saying don't wear a mask. All of a sudden, everybody's got to wear a mask. And as you know, masks cause problems too. With that being said, I'm a believer in masks. I think masks are good. But I leave it up to the governors. Many of the governors are changing. They're more mask into. They like the concept of masks.
All right, so that is what the American president had to say, whether he would want his people, his countrymen, to actually wear masks. Meanwhile, in the interview, Donald Trump once again refused to publicly commit to accepting the results of the upcoming presidential polls if he were to lose. Now, in the interview, Donald Trump said that he's pretty sure that he won't be defeated, as the elections, which are due in November, will be fake. Listen in to what the American president had to say.
Can you give a direct answer? You will accept the election?
I have to see. Look, I have to see. No, I'm not going to just say yes. I'm not going to say no. And I didn't last time either. First of all, I'm not losing, because those are fake polls. They were fake in 2016, and now they're even more fake. The polls were much worse in 2016.
Is Joe Biden senile?
I don't want to say that. I say he's not competent to be president.
And also, the American president said that the Confederate flag is a symbol of pride for the southern U.S. states. Remember, the flag has been at the center of a storm amidst the Black Lives Matter protests, and this is the Confederate Army fought against the abolition of slavery during the American Civil War.
So you're not offended by it?
Well, I'm not offended either by Black Lives Matter. That's freedom of speech. And you know, the whole thing with cancel culture, we can't cancel our whole history. We can't forget that the North and the South fought. We have to remember that. Otherwise, we'll end up fighting again.
All right, so that was the American president there in the interview, making several important statements. And to give us more perspective as to how all of this, of course, is playing out in the United States, we are joined in by Jagrati Dave, who's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Now, Jagrati, let me begin by asking you about, in terms of this huge controversy that is playing out in the United States about whether to wear or to not wear a mask. This essentially should be an issue of a medical advisory, a guideline which the doctors would give to people who would like to stay safe, but it's become a politically divisive issue in the United States, where people are saying that being asked to wear a mask is actually to trample on their constitutional rights. You know, give us a sense as to what this debate is all about in the United States.
Yes, so as you say, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, have issued guidelines recommending that Americans wear a face covering when they're in public, when they are unable to socially distance themselves from other people. The director of the CDC has said that it's an important tool to be used to prevent the further spread of COVID-19. However, as you heard in that clip, President Trump is saying that he doesn't believe that that's the case. He said that he wants there to be a certain amount of freedom. He says he thinks masks, he's a believer in masks, but he just doesn't believe in the government, the federal government, forcing people to wear masks. He's leaving that up to states to do. So it's not that no one in the United States is ordering that people should wear masks. They are. It's just that the president isn't doing it. It's state governors, and in some cases where the state governors agree with the president that it shouldn't be a statewide mandate, it's left to local authorities in an even smaller level, on a county level, to enforce in their regions. Now, health professionals obviously say that a wider mandate to wear masks is much more beneficial, because obviously you'll have people travelling between areas where there is a mandate to wear masks, where there isn't. You have several stores in the United States, like Costco, like Apple, like Starbucks, who have implemented mask mandates in their stores, in every store across the country, just to make sure that everyone who comes into their stores is wearing a mask, even if their stores are in an area where there isn't a local or a state statewide mask mandate in place. So this is really this kind of piecemeal patchwork approach to mask wearing that critics of the administration say is partly contributing to the rise in numbers. And it's exactly this that's causing some of the confusion amongst people as well.
Absolutely, indeed. And one would have thought that there would be no confusion or no disagreement over whether or to wear or not to wear a mask. But the issue where there could be a lot of disagreement is about the Confederate flag. We saw what the Pentagon did. It put out a list of all those flags that could be flown in all American military bases, but it left out the Confederate flag. But here we heard the American president say that the Confederate flag is a matter of American pride. And he said that this is something that it cannot be erased from American history.
Yes, this has been a debate that has really come to the foreground ever since the protests came to the streets of the United States in cities across the country and then spread to cities around the world, in fact. These protests sparked by the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And part of this has really brought America to a reckoning with its own history to do with racial injustice, which is intimately tied to the history of slavery. And the Confederate flag, Confederate symbols, these symbols of Confederate generals who fought against the abolition of slavery, they are dotted across the United States. And part of the protests were here in the United States and in places like the UK, in cities like Bristol, you saw the tearing down of some of these symbols and statues, which those who are supportive of the protesters and supportive of this move will say that the attempt to instigate a debate on this hasn't worked. This is a time where something needs to be done to prove the point. Those who are critical of this are saying it's not about tearing down statues, it's important to start a debate. While the protesters who pulled these statues down will say, we've tried to ask, but these statues are still there. And so that's why they've torn them down. The president, on the other hand, is taking the approach of they should remain as a symbol, as a memory, as he said, the pride of the South. Now, this is at odds with several Republicans, actually. In fact, one of them is former Secretary of State, retired General Colin Powell, who said he broadly agreed with one of the measures, which was the removing of the flags from the bases. There's also calls to rename Confederate bases that have been named after military generals from the Confederate era as well.
Absolutely. And the other issue that I also want to discuss with you before we let you go is what the president had to say on the polls. He said that it was far worse in 2016, and therefore he does not want to give any credibility to the polls that show that he's actually trailing Joe Biden. But in the wake of what's been happening with the coronavirus pandemic, and also with this very deeply divisive problem, that started that's been ongoing, but this was something that was highlighted with the killing of George Floyd, the issue of racism. How much do you think these two issues have actually hampered Donald Trump's chances of getting re-elected?
Yes, the recent Fox News poll and other polls, in fact, have shown that Joe Biden is holding his lead over President Trump. And in that interview with Chris Wallace on Fox News, President Trump dismissed the polls. He disregarded them, as he often does when there are polls that show him in not the best light and show him in a worse position compared to his Democratic rival. And he has dismissed them, saying that calling them fake news. But really, the handling of the pandemic, the other issue that was addressed in that poll was the competence of the president, of the mental capabilities of each candidate. And both Joe Biden and President Trump scored under 50%, but Joe Biden did lead President Trump on that front as well, which contributed to the president criticizing Joe Biden's competence at being president. And really, the handling of the pandemic, the handling of the protests are two major issues in the run-up to the election. But the pandemic is really the one that is continuing at the focus at the moment, given the surge in cases that we're seeing in states across the South and the West.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Jagrati Dave, for joining us and getting us all those insights.